What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here from RotoWire, talking some waiver wire options for fantasy basketball for the week ahead. Alex, we are finally back on what feels like a more normal NBA schedule with the NBA Cup now in the rear view. So looking ahead, we got 16 teams that play 4 games in the coming week. 10 teams play 3 games, only 4 teams on a 2-game week. Those 4 are Cleveland, the LA Clippers, New Orleans, and Sacramento. We'll talk more about some schedule notes for streaming later in the video, but I want to start out, Alex, with I feel like a lot of the same names that we mention every week, guys that you should be checking for in your leagues, especially if you're playing in a shallower, more casual format. You know, a few names who jumped out to me, guys who are like sub 33% rostered. Dereck Lively, his roster rate is still way down on ESPN. Keyonte George is hovering around 30%. We say it every week, but Goga Bitadze, he's still only 20% rostered in ESPN leagues. And then Malik Beasley, with Jaden Ivey banged up right now, I think he should be higher than 18% rostered.
I think so too. Yeah, I mean he's one of the best threes streamers we have, in fantasy. I would say the main name that stuck out to me on at least in Yahoo leagues, which usually have higher roster rates for a lot of guys anyways, like Ayo Dosunmu, who I think will continue to have value throughout most of the season. Other than that, though, like you said, with the relatively low volume weeks we had, there just hasn't been as much movement as earlier in the year.
Yeah, you're right about that. So we haven't had, huge swings in rostership. A lot of the players that we'll mention, you've probably heard in previous videos, but hey, we got to do what we got to do. A couple other names who I would not quite put in the sneaky ads category, Alex. TJ McConnell, somebody we've talked about. He's hovering around 15% roster rate in ESPN leagues. And I have a kind of a personal vengeance against Ben Simmons, especially when it comes to fantasy. Do you have any interest? Are you picking him up? He's 14% rostered right now in ESPN.
Ben Simmons, yeah, sure. I think he fits in the category of, like, we're still trying to figure out exactly what Brooklyn is going to do without Schroeder. And if you're punting points, I think he's 100% can roster him. He started the last game, had 10, 8, 4 with 2 steals. So yeah, for sure.
If you're punting games played, maybe you can roster him as well. But no, you're right, man. I mean, he played a season high 31 minutes in their last game earlier this week. We'll see. I think the workload's going to be there. I mean, we'll talk more about the Nets as the video rolls along, because that is a team that should have some opportunity now, and perhaps even more opportunity if they make some more trades before the deadline. I'll also throw out a few more names here at the top, Alex. Justin Champagnie in Washington. Yeah. But we need to caution that Malcolm Brogdon is off the injury report. Corey Kispert is expected to return as well. But Kyle Kuzma still out indefinitely. I think that's the biggest piece as far as Champagnie's role in the rotation is concerned. He started their last 4 games. He's given you 17 points, almost 10 rebounds, 2.8 steals, 1.3 blocks, 1.8 threes, and shooting 55% from the field. So there could be a temporary dip here, if and when Kuzma is back. Obviously we're not going to see Champagnie playing 35 minutes a night, but he's somebody in a deeper format if you can afford to stash him, because I think there's a pretty good chance some of the names that we just mentioned won't be there a month or two from now. He's somebody that certainly has turned some heads over the last couple weeks.
He's on my list. I would say probably the biggest sort of standard league ad. You're right to point out that the Wizards are healthier, and so he's probably not going to continue to play, like he played 39 minutes the other night, had a double-double. But I still think most of his stats, at least his like per minute stats, are pretty legit. He's averaging about a fantasy point per minute. So if you are in a points league and Champagnie goes from playing 36 minutes to 26 minutes, you could probably still roster him.
Donovan Clingnan is on my list yet again this week. He's still hovering around 12% rostership in ESPN leagues. We've said it before, but all he needs is like 15 minutes. When he sees at least 15 minutes this season, he's giving you 8 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks. And obviously the blocks are what you're chasing there. I have Royce O'Neale on my list. Someone's out just about every night for the Suns. Sometimes it's Bradley Beal, sometimes it's Kevin Durant, sometimes it's other role players, but it's kind of hard to trace who that's going to be. Either way, Royce O'Neale is kind of that jack of all trades guy who just sees more minutes anytime one of the big 3 is out. And again, recent history would suggest that that's going to be more common than not. So he's somebody I don't mind rostering. His rostership is sitting around 10%. Then I'll also throw out Dorian Finney-Smith. He's 7% rostered right now in ESPN leagues. He gives you some defensive numbers. You're looking for a few rebounds, but 2.5 threes per game for Dorian Finney-Smith over his last 10. And I think he could see elevated minutes over the next few weeks. For one, the Nets don't have a lot of bodies remaining, and two, perhaps a pre-trade deadline audition for Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yeah, I could see a bit of a bump here after the trade of Schroeder, and Finney-Smith has proven throughout his career he can fill up the box score enough. Like, he can pass a little bit and hit his threes and get his defensive numbers. And you mentioned he's 31. The Nets are not going to want to keep him around long term. But yeah, add him now, and then if he becomes a drop later, that's fine.
Who else you got on your list?
I'll say along the same line as your Clingnan suggestion, I have Rob Williams. If you're in a deeper league, just the per minute production, it's there. He just returned from a 2-week absence, so that's someone to keep in mind. Obi Toppin, his shot attempts are up. Double-digit shot attempts in 5 of the past 7 games, averaging about 15 points on 60% shooting. That's going to come down a little bit, but he's a pretty efficient shooter in general. Someone that I would add now and just see if it can continue. And 2 more names in sort of like my deep to standard league roster rate. Cason Wallace of the Thunder just continues to be a steals and blocks guy, playing basically 30 minutes a game over the past handful. And Kevin Porter Jr. for the Clippers, who is getting some increased minutes because of Terrence Mann being out, but has played at least 24 minutes in 7 of his past 8 games. Is averaging 12 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, and 1.8 steals. That's 27 fantasy points. Certainly good enough for many leagues.
Yeah, I like those calls. I have Cason Wallace on my list as well. And I'll throw out Alex Caruso. I mean, it's really just steals at this point because he's doing nothing offensively. He's missed enough time that it feels like he's always recovering from something and has not really been able to string these long stretches together. I do think at some point, you could see more from him as a 3-point shooter. Certainly the Thunder could use another shooter in the lineup. He's only shooting 25% from 3, but when he was a 41% guy in Chicago last season. So I think that could turn around at some point. But in a deeper league, if you're just looking for steals, he's still giving you plenty of those, 1.8 per game on the year. I'm not going to go into detail on Bub Carrington. You can watch literally any other video on our channel and hear plenty of Bub Carrington talk. But if you can afford to stash him until the Wizards trade Malcolm Brogdon, I would advise doing that. Jalen Smith as a potential stash or maybe even just a straight up ad in really deep leagues. He's 3% rostered right now. Look, if Vucevic is out the door, Jalen Smith is the next man up. Of course, they could bring back a big man in a Vooch trade, but I think Jalen Smith could be positioned to really take off from a minutes perspective. The 2 guys I always mention every week in terms of 3-pointers, Duncan Robinson, he's still only 3% rostered. Corey Kispert back from injury tonight, in fact, for the Washington Wizards. So he's been very up and down. The Wizards in general just get blown out every night. It's not super appealing, but again, if you're in a deep league and you need some threes, you could look to either of those options. And then I just wanted to ask you in general, Alex, about the Brooklyn Nets. I wrote down a few names with this team, but obviously, since the last time we talked, Dennis Schroeder is now a member of the Golden State Warriors. We don't really have much of a sample as far as what this rotation will look like. But, on our podcast, we had a lot of people asking about Shake Milton, Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, Keon Johnson, perhaps in the mix. I mean, did any of those names really pique your interest?
I know. Exactly. It's bizarrely enough, the guy who had the best game in that first game against Cleveland without Dennis Schroeder was arguably Day'Ron Sharpe, believe it or not. Had 15 points and 7 rebounds with 3 steals and an assist in 20 minutes.
My goat.
I mean, you can go ahead and pick him up if you want. I mean, maybe they'll run out some 2-center stuff. Clowney will shoot some threes out there. Maybe they'll have Claxton try to space a little bit, but it's just there's not a lot of great options, I have to be honest.
I'm glad you mentioned the 3-point shooting with Clowney. That guy fires. He fires away. He took 10 threes in 18 minutes against Memphis about a week ago. So I don't know how many he's going to make. I don't know how consistent the minutes are going to be, but if you're looking for kind of that Cam Whitmore-y type of archetype, maybe he's the guy in Brooklyn. But we need a little bit more time, I think, to evaluate this rotation. Do you have any of your sicko mode deep league ads this week?
Just 2. I mean, you mentioned Jalen Smith, and then the other 2 guys you mentioned 3-point streamer Sam Hauser for the Celtics is 4% rostered. should probably be higher than that considering what he can give you. And then Kris Dunn, who we have suggested before, his minutes are decreasing, but his steals are increasing. So this month he's averaging 7 points, 2.5 rebounds, 2 assists, but 3 steals per game in 22 minutes. That sort of rounds out the super deep league suggestions.
I will say, for what it's worth, we're recording this on Thursday, December 19th, and Sam Hauser is dealing with some sort of back issue. He's kind of been in and out of late, but doesn't seem like anything too serious. When he's been out there, though, he's basically a lock for multiple threes. I mean, he's got 15 games already this season with at least 2 made 3-pointers. So in deep formats, I like that call. What do you got for us in terms of streaming schedule notes?
Yeah, so there are 4 teams that play 3 games from this Friday, the 20th, to Monday, so before Christmas Eve. No games on Christmas Eve. So if you're in a streaming situation, you're in a daily league, these are the teams to look at: Cleveland, Miami, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. So in terms of players who are generally available, you're looking at like Caris LeVert, George Niang on Cleveland. Miami, you talked about Duncan Robinson, he's on there. Drew Smith has been getting some more minutes, had a big steal game the other night. Milwaukee, I don't really think there's a guy, maybe Gary Trent if you're in a super deep league. And then for Philadelphia, probably Andre Drummond. Yabusele hasn't played as well lately, but those are the 4 teams that if you're in a daily league, probably good to target before Christmas Eve.
All right, good notes, as always, on the upcoming schedule. Next time we do one of these videos, it'll be post-Christmas. So we thank everybody for watching along every week, for all the commentary, all the likes on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed, of course, to the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel. Enjoy the holidays. We will talk to you after Christmas. And, of course, you can catch all of our live podcasts on the RotoWire YouTube channel, live and archived. You can hear them on Spotify. You can hear them on Apple Pods, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll have a bit of an abbreviated schedule coming your way, of course, during the holidays. But enjoy it. We'll talk to you soon.